Hi, welcome to our 39th study in the Gospel of Mark. It's good to have you with us. We are presently in Mark chapter 15, and we're going to pick up at verse 40 and go through verse 47 if you'd like to follow along. We're also going to post those verses on the screen so you can read them along with me. We have reached the point in the Gospel where Jesus is now dead. The centurion who was standing there watching Jesus die said, "Surely this man is the Son of God." And that's where we left off last time. Now, the only people that are really with Jesus and spoken of in great detail in the Gospel of Mark are his 12 apostles. But by the time you get to this point, the 12 apostles are nowhere in the story. These women who took care of Jesus are there. And we're going to pick up at verse 40 and read the passage from there, verses 40 through 47. Some women were watching from a distance, and among them were Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James the Younger and of Joseph, and Salome. In Galilee, these women had followed him and cared for his needs. Many other women who had come up with him to Jerusalem were also there. It was preparation day, that is, the day before the Sabbath. So as evening approached, Joseph of Arimathea, a prominent member of the council who was himself waiting for the kingdom of God, went boldly to Pilate and asked for Jesus' body. Pilate was surprised to hear that he was already dead. Summoning the centurion, he asked him if Jesus had already died. And when he learned from the centurion that it was so, he gave the body to Joseph. So Joseph bought some linen cloth, took down the body, wrapped it in linen, and placed it in a tomb cut out of rock. Then he rolled a stone against the entrance of the tomb. Mary Magdalene and Mary the mother of Joseph saw where he was laid. Boy, there's a couple of big things here that I want to talk about. To many ancients, Jewish women were considered something less than men. Although it was true that some women were treated like property, that wasn't true for every Jewish woman, although it was common. Interestingly, in Egypt, they have found some evidence that women had more rights and privileges in the synagogue than in Judea, where this took place. Here, women were not accorded that kind of privilege and equality that was true in some parts of Egypt, where we have evidence that women could be the presidents of the synagogue, leaders of the synagogue, and actually read the law and participate. But in Judea, that wasn't the case at all. Here in the text, women are following at a distance, and they are the only ones present at the death of Jesus. They're mentioned by name: Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James the Younger, the James the Less. That would be the second James in the list of apostles mentioned in Mark. This is not the mother of James, of Peter, James, and John. That's not who we're talking about. That James was the first martyred apostle. Here we have James the Less, meaning the younger one, and also the mother of the same woman is the mother of a man named Joseph. Salome was there. We're left to wonder and speculate about Salome. Interestingly, there's been some thought that Salome might have been the mother of James and John. That would have made her Mrs. Zebedee. So we're just guessing there, but not quite sure. The description of these women is really quite striking. We haven't heard much about these ladies in his Gospels, in Mark's Gospel, and he seems to be making up for lost time in mentioning them, but only because these are the only people still left to tend to Jesus. Christ did not treat women like second-class citizens. It's obvious here by the number of women who came to his side. They likely fed him and washed his clothes and gave him a place to sleep at night. They were an important part of his daily ministry. He couldn't have done what he did without these women following him and caring for his needs. It says that they served him, which means that they served the greatest servant that ever lived. Jesus once said that he didn't come to be served, but to serve and to give his life a ransom for many. Here's a sizable group of women at the moment when they were the most vulnerable as women, the most filled with grief and confusion, and the men had taken their leave. They had abandoned their master, and he told them that they would. He said, they'll strike the shepherd and you'll scatter, but the women didn't. If there is a passage that seems to imply the full restoration of dignity to women, particularly Jewish women, but all women in ancient biblical literature, it's this passage right here. They're the only ones left to take care of Jesus. Jews treated women lightly because they fell to the tempter in Genesis. They convinced their husbands to sin. They were seen in many ancient documents to be more easily persuadable, more naive, spiritually weak, more emotional, less knowledgeable. After all, men were the priests and they headed up the synagogues. They served publicly. They read the law. Again, as I mentioned earlier, there's some evidence that there was more equality in the Egyptian synagogues, since it said that they were presiding, they taught and read from the law in Egypt. Here the men are nowhere to be seen except one man. And at the crucial moment, men are somewhere else. It's even implied that there was a great number. Well, actually, it doesn't imply it. It just simply says it in verse 41, that there were many other women who had come up to Jerusalem who were there on that day that are not named in the passage. In ancient writings, women get short shrift, but not here. Mark, probably instructed by Peter, mentions them, some of them by name, and mentions that they are there, and they stand tall in their grief and in their courage in being there. Only one man comes forward, Joseph of Arimathea, who is a member of that 70-man Jewish council who ruled Judaism from Jerusalem. His name, Joseph of Arimathea. He risks everything. The Sanhedrin, that Jewish council, had just condemned Jesus to death. He's there claiming the body and going to take care of him. It would probably spoil his reputation. It's a very good possibility that Mark is speaking here of someone that folks who read this would know. Joseph of Arimathea would have been a character that they know, else why mention the name? But he goes and he requests the body of Jesus. Pilate gives it to him after confirming that Jesus is in fact deceased. He goes and buys linen cloths. Mark goes to some detail to say he goes and buys linen cloth. He makes strips of that linen cloth and then takes Jesus down from the cross, wraps Jesus' body in these linen cloths. He then takes him to a rock tomb and then puts Jesus in that tomb and has a rock, a boulder, rolled over to seal the tomb. Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of Joseph, saw the place where he was buried. It says in the passage, in our last verse, 2 witnesses to confirm what they had seen, what Joseph had done, and Jesus was buried and the tomb was closed. And for now, that's pretty much the story that we're going to cover. In addition to this powerful witness of believing women, there's another key point here that we need to make, is that we have several facts that indicate that Jesus in fact died and was buried. That's important to this story. Some still argue today that what happened to Jesus was he fell into a coma or into a deep swoon of some kind. It's called the swoon theory. Was then taken down from the cross, was wrapped in strips of cloth, and then put in the tomb. And there in the tomb, he revived on the cold stone. That actually he was in a coma and fell unconscious. Mark answers every one of those arguments in telling the story. Number one, a Roman centurion confirmed that Jesus was dead. A Roman centurion knew what dead was. They killed lots of people. Roman centurions were trained killers. They knew dead when they saw dead, and the Roman centurion confirmed it. Secondly, Joseph wrapped him in linen. It was virtually unterrible. A man coming out from a coma, half beaten to death, hung on a cross for 6 hours, bleeding and in shock. How in the world would he have physically been able to tear the linen that he was wrapped in? Thirdly, a stone secured the tomb. Here's a man with wounded feet, wounded hands, and somehow arousing from a coma without medical assistance and rolling this tomb away by himself. We're not talking about a little rock, we're talking about a boulder. And fourth, just in case a skeptic thinks that they found the wrong tomb empty, it says that Joseph did the burying, and the two Marys, Mary Magdalene and Mary the mother of Joseph, saw where he was laid. Very quickly here, when we get to Mark 16, it's Mary Magdalene who goes to that very tomb and finds the tomb empty. So we have two witnesses to verify that Jesus was buried in this tomb. Mark states one thing quite clearly. Jesus was truly dead. He had lived and he had died, and he was now fully buried. And that's where we'll leave off today as we continue the testimony of the Gospel of Mark. We'll see you next time.